Dr. Deanna Minich is a dynamic and internationally known body, mind, spirit health expert, yoga practitioner, and author. Her 20 years of experience in the nutrition field led her to develop an integrated approach to nutrition called Food and Spirit, www.foodandspirit.com, which spans the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual aspects of health. Her well-rounded experience in the field of nutrition includes private practice, preclinical and clinical research, product development, global product technology integration, management, marketing, writing, and education. Dr. Minich received her nutrition expertise from her doctoral PhD study at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands, where she focused on essential fatty acid absorption and metabolism, and from her master's degree, MS, at the University of Illinois at Chicago. She is a fellow of the American College of Nutrition, a certified nutrition specialist, a certified nutritionist by the Washington State Department of Health, and a registered yoga instructor. She is the author of 4 books on wellness and over 15 scientific publications. Currently, she consults as Vice President of Education at the Personalized Lifestyle Medicine Institute in Seattle, Washington, and is an adjunct faculty for the Institute for Functional Medicine and 3 universities. Her passion is teaching a whole self approach to nutrition. Hey everybody, it's Dr. Mike Akinfora. Welcome back to the Pain Relief Project, Natural Solutions That Actually Work. Today with me, I have Dr. Deanna Minich. How are you, Deanna?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. So today we're going to talk about the whole self-nourishment for pain and inflammation, a 7-step approach to breakthrough vitality. But before we get to that, let's give some people some flavor on your background, because you've got a very interesting background. I see you studied in the Netherlands. So talk to people about your background.
Well, I'm very much an out-of-the-box PhD nutritionist. I am not your standard run-of-the-mill creating a diet plan type of nutritionist. I'm very integrated in how I think about the body and the other components that we have. And perhaps that's because I've been doing functional medicine for over a decade. I studied with Dr. Jeff Bland and even worked with him very closely for 10 years. He's the father of functional medicine. And in fact, he was one of the first people to start talking about brain on fire, the body on fire, metaphorically, to really speak to inflammation as the foundation for so many different chronic diseases. So I have a PhD and a master's in nutrition, just straight nutritional biochemistry. And then I have this other interest in mind-body medicine. So I bring into everything I do, into these 7 aspects that you spoke of, the whole self. That's why I call it the whole self. I think it's okay just to talk about food, but I think it's a very incomplete picture because it's not the whole self. It's part of who we are. So I have done a number of various studies in mind-body medicine, working with just looking at the effects of meditation or affirmations, guided imagery and visualizations, different things. And even just looking at how the power of our thoughts and beliefs, as well as emotions, impact our health. So I fuse those worlds together, the physical and the emotional, through the eating experience.
Fascinating. So tell me a little more about that. That's really interesting. There are not many people that look at it from that point of view.
Yeah, and I think it just evolved as part of my journey. So as I started to study this whole realm of nutrition and even battle with my own eating issues and some of the challenges that I had, I realized that not everything could be solved through food alone. In fact, I even saw that with patients. Many times we'd get patients to 60 to 80% improved, but there was still this 20 to 40% that remained, just really, there was something more there. And as we talk about food is so integral to our daily lives. And what I have noticed with other people and even myself, that how we eat is how we live, and how we live is how we eat. So the two are very intertwined. They're very interconnected. So how we eat, when we eat, what we eat, all those things tie into who we are as people. So that's really the essence. It's just through personal experience and also professional experience, being in clinical practice, seeing that people need more than just a dietary prescription. And many times they're jumping from diet to diet anyway, and they still haven't really resolved many of their issues. It's like a never-ending quest. So it just causes us to start looking under the stones of many different things, whether it's our stress patterns, what our emotions are like, and emotions tie very tightly into pain and inflammation. So I think it's a broader context here that we're working with.
Absolutely. And those stress patterns are something that we look at in our office as well. And we have some technology that actually measures heart rate variability. And we see these stress patterns. And it is remarkable that once we start to remove the inflammation, how well people do. But then there's that component that you're talking about where folks, it's not just one thing. It's the emotional that triggers the physical. It's the emotional that affects the spiritual. And you're talking about the exact same thing through nutrition.
Exactly. So yeah, nutrition can give us the benefit, or actually food. I would say food can give us the conduit to many different aspects of who we are. I really do see it as a journey to personal growth. And even just to speak to what you said there about heart rate variability, that's a wonderful marker to look at, because I've done some work with HRV and looking at people's emotional responses to food, having people hooked up to an HRV, a heart rate variability biofeedback device, and looking at how when they talked about food, sometimes their heart would be telling me a different message than what they were conveying verbally. So I always believe that our heart doesn't lie, and that the more flexible we can be in our heart, in our gut, and in our brain, the better off we will be overall for aging and vitality. That really is the essence of vitality, is to remain very fluid and flowing. And so shaking things up and looking at things in different ways, I think, can be very conducive to our health.
That's fascinating. So did you think about this prior to you're a certified yoga instructor now? Did this come about before that, or is this part of the development of?
Yeah, I often tell people that I'm a hybrid. I've always been a curious, kind of a dual-minded person in the way of being a scientist, but then also there's this other creative part of me that just wants to explore. So I took my first yoga class when I was 18. So this is, 2 decades ago now, and more than that. And it was so fascinating to me what I learned in that yoga class, just really, I can still go back to that experience. How sometimes you have memories in your life and all of a sudden, you remember certain ones that are just peppered through your life, and it's like those are unforgettable. And for me, one of those unforgettable moments and memories is my first yoga class. I can remember the person, the instructor. I can remember the feel of the room, the smells in the room. And it was such a pivotal experience for me because it just opened up my mind to other modalities. Before that point, I was just such a straight scientist. I was kind of this nerdy high schooler. I liked science. I was in the advanced biology course, and, I was all set. I was pre-med. I was going to be a physician, classically trained, and, go through the whole thing, taking my MCATs and getting ready to do that. But then when I started taking these yoga classes and when I started taking other classes in college, I was actually a dual major, or, my major was biology, and I also had another focus, which was English literature. So I was always very curious about, these two worlds and how are they going to come together?
Absolutely. And that's a very unique, you're looking at really two different areas, two different hemispheres of the brain. When you talk about English lit and bio, they're really two different realms of thinking.
Yeah, in some ways they are, and in other ways they converge. There's some beautiful poetry about functioning of the body, and I think that's really where we're headed to in the 21st century. You look at some of the people that have been very successful or breakthrough in their ideas. And I even think of Steve Jobs, who initially started out in typography and was very, very logical and linear. And, there was an art to that, but then there's also this degree of just foundational, just structure, and so I think in the 21st century, the way for us to really get answers into what's going on with us, we're going to have to look broader and much more unified. We're going to have to look at the interconnected web of everything that we really represent. And that's coming through things like systems biology and quantum physics and functional medicine. And I think a lot of those different paradigms are being birthed now. I think that people are still trying to figure it all out. With the decoding of the human genome back in 2003, when that project was complete, I think that opened up a huge sphere of quantification of all the different things that are happening within the body, especially at the genetic level. And then even listening to more of the epigenetics, now learning that our DNA is not our destiny. Just having those two operating principles within the 21st century really launch into medicine is revolutionary if you think about it. This is truly a remarkable time to live in.
It is really one of the most fascinating times in the history of our planet to be alive. And you absolutely hit the nail on the head, is we have a meshing, a melding of these fields that people would say are not even related, and they're causing us to reflect and actually come out with newer and better outcomes than we've ever seen before.
Agreed. Yeah. And I think it's just how we, even if it's not necessarily providing answers in the way of diagnostics, it can also be in how we're thinking about our health, that our thought paradigm is shifting, and thought precedes matter. So if we don't have the change in our thoughts first, how can we ever expect to create point of care diagnostics or to really come up with bioinformatics to the point of really understanding our health in a moment by moment situation? So I think it's really good that our minds are shifting, that there's so many journals now talking about mind-body medicine, talking about psychosomatic medicine. And especially when we look at pain, there are a number of studies that show that, and I'm thinking specifically about just even osteoarthritis. A number of studies have to control for the strong effect of the mind on the body and the placebo effect. Right. And so in some trials, and I'm just even thinking osteoarthritis right now, 40 to 60% of an effect of a modality could be placebo. So you have to take that into account and how we see everything. It just shows that the mind is medicine. We think of food as medicine, but really the mind is medicine.
It truly is. And that leads us right into what we want to talk about today. So let's really dive into this. Let's talk about the 7-step approach. What's first on the list when we're talking about how the pain and inflammation through a whole self-nourishment? Talk to me about that.
Yeah. So throughout Food and Spirit, which is really the platform that I've created and I work with a lot, I look at the different colors which connect to certain themes in our lives. So the first step on this path is the color red. So of course the color red, I'm sure people start thinking, wow, inflammation and pain. But the color red in general, if we look at just even the psychological and other meanings that have been tethered to it, really what we're referring to here is being rooted. I call it the root part of us. And so the root is all about issues of safety, survival, being in the physical world, looking at our family, the lineage that we've come from, our genes, our epigenes, looking at our immune system function, and essentially what separates us or what gives us an identity within the world. So this is our root, who we are, our identity. So when it comes to vitality, one of the things that I think of is how do we, and I'm going to speak out of both sides, right? I'm going to talk about the physiological, and then I'm going to talk about psychological, and we can do that for each of the 7. So when it comes to your root, the parts of your body, the physiology, we think about things like the immune system. We think about how we eliminate, our bowel movements and excreting, eliminating. We think about the skin, the boundary between us and everything else in the environment. So how do we get rooted in those things? One of the things that I see in particular when it comes to the immune system and inflammation is, and I do this quite extensively, being that I just did the Detox Summit some months ago, was we look at an elimination diet. What are the things that we're eating on the physical level that we're taking in and responding to? How do we identify our food triggers? So that's really key for inflammation, because essentially we can be in a perpetual state of inflammation. And inflammation, what is it? Rubor, color, or dolor. It's pain, heat, and redness, and even tumor, swelling, right? So, all of these different facets of inflammation can come out with the eating experience due to the engagement of the immune system. So I think that first and foremost, as part of this root or this red symbol of who we are, it's really getting a hold on your immune system and really trying to understand, how do we eat in a way that really benefits who we are, rather than just forcing things through and responding and reacting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then the second piece of this, we think about the root, and then the psychology of that is, if we think of the immune system and we look at this more metaphorically, what are we feeling like we have to provide resistance to in our psyche? Like, are we defending ourselves? Or do we feel exposed or unsafe, unprotected? And I think that, this is more of the psychology parts of it, where if we start to examine what are the issues there, because a lot of those issues, we even know about this term within, this was launched in 2012 in a scientific journal, this phrase symbolic disease, that many times what we feel, what we think, and what we say translates into bodily symptoms. So if we are not feeling safe, if we are not feeling protected, this might translate into having some issues with the immune system. It's very logical that there would be this bidirectional arrow between the two. So that's the root.
Absolutely. Let's talk about, we're in colors, we're in red. So tell me about other colors.
Yeah, the next one is orange, and orange represents flow. So flow is really key. I've already mentioned this word. I think it's pivotal. And when we think about our physiology, we think of anything that's flowing in our body. So the water in our body, and part of becoming inflamed many times is getting an accumulation of water. It's almost like there's some stagnation there. And then also, just the kidneys, which control our water and our excretion of water into urine. And also, just our growth processes within the body and systems of creativity. So when it comes to being vital, we want to keep our body's ability to be fluid and flowing at all times. And many times when we have pain, we have a lack of flow. So maybe there's an obstruction. Maybe there is some type of swelling, some type of block, or immune engagement in an area that's blocking any kind of flow. So I think it's really important to get more flow physically through things like physical activity, even if it's taking a walk or going to the gym and doing strength training, or maybe it's as simple as, just getting a massage. There can also be a passive way to do this. I know Dr. Bland and I have talked quite extensively about the extracellular matrix and how we have these proteins and carbohydrates outside of our cell that are communicating and essentially shuttling through things like oxygen and waste products of the cell. And when we get something like a massage, it helps to really move these things through the body. I think it's important. So moving the body.
Sure. We're looking at, really, when we talk about inflammation of a joint, that stasis that you see is really all that extracellular matrix is just sitting there, and there is no flow.
Right. It's very, very true. And again, that gentle movement, this is where even acupuncture, and my husband's an acupuncturist, and so I get to hear all about the benefits of acupuncture, and I've also done some reading on it. And when acupuncture needles are used, and this comes from the work of Helene Langevin, who I believe is at Harvard, she had some lovely research papers published showing that when that needle gets inserted, it's triggering connective tissue fibers, which are connected to that extracellular matrix, and that can send signals to the cell. And those signals to the cell might be stimulating things like an anti-inflammatory type of cascade or, changes in the genome. So having these small, subtle changes can actually create this ripple effect and this flow to the cell.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So is there a blue?
There is a blue. There is an indigo, a colored one. That is all about the brain. So that is, when I think of blue, I think of insight. And insight is connected to the brain, all functions of the brain or the eyes. I think about the sense of cognition, our brain health. And even that term that I mentioned before, brain on fire, this is... I think that the issue in the 21st century, especially, I think we're going to see an epidemic in 2025. We're going to start seeing skyrocketing rates. We are already seeing this with things like mental illness or cognitive decline, dementia. This is another area where we see inflammation occurring, and we don't typically think of the brain as an organ, but it very much is, and it can harbor all kinds of inflammatory cytokines and start changing the parameters inside the cells in the brain that can change cognition, and that can be very detrimental. So I think one of the pieces of vitality when it comes to the brain is to, first of all, the color blue is relevant in this case because there's some great work showing that the phytonutrients, the plant compounds that are in blue-purple foods, and these phytonutrients are called proanthocyanidins, and perhaps there are several others, that they seem to find their way into the brain, specific to parts of the brain that are responsible for learning and memory. So that's really key, and when there was a study that showed that out of all the colors, there was a greater deficit in blue purple than all of the other ones. So we don't get enough blue purple. So if we want to be vital in the brain, we definitely have to bring in that cooling blue purple color, which again, that pigment serves a purpose within that brain matter.
Fascinating. My hand hurts from writing so much. Oh my goodness. This is amazing.
There are so many other things about the brain, really. We could go deeper and deeper. I mean, even looking at other measures of resiliency and really creating more vitality in the brain. Because if I were to ask everybody that's listening what their biggest fear is, I would assume that a chunk of people would say losing their mental acuity. For many people, this is a huge issue because when you lose your marbles, it essentially means that you become very dependent on others. You lose your sense of quality of life, functionality. You can't do basic day-to-day things. And that is very scary to many people. You think of people that are caregiving for their Alzheimer's disease patients and also parents and other family members. I mean, it's a devastating condition because there's that sense of just, being blocked off, walled off. So there are definitely strategies. I mean, even following the Mediterranean diet, there was a great study that showed that the greater the compliance to the Mediterranean diet, the greater the number of years that somebody would remain free of any kind of cognitive impairment. So it really does behoove us to be eating well in order to optimize our brain function.
Oh, that is a huge component to optimizing brain function.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And of course, there are other things like physical activity is key. You can actually increase the size of your brain matter by exercising, just even as little as like 3 hours per week. So it's really important to get neuronal plasticity, or to shake things up in the brain, do things differently, think new thoughts, do crossword puzzles, drive different ways to the shopping center than you normally would. Just try to get as much variety in your daily living as you possibly can.
I always remember there was a small study out of Texas on brain plasticity, and the study was done on juggling, and they're going into nursing home and teaching seniors that were living in nursing homes how to juggle, starting with scars first, and then that really activates the brain tremendously.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it makes complete sense. Absolutely. Yeah.
We're talking about spatial orientation and all of that stuff that they're losing, and just this people can Google that and look that up, but that's always stuck with me as one of the strategies to use.
Yeah. So the brain is a big one. And like you said, there are many strategies. Number 4, we'll just go back into the order of the rainbow just to put it in perspective. So we went through red and orange and then indigo. Then there's yellow. It was very interesting for me to see these results from a study published some years ago showing that the happiest, healthiest people, when you ask them what their favorite color is, they say yellow. So I always find that interesting. It's never really been my favorite color, but maybe it should be. I like green personally. Yes, yellow corresponds, and even in traditional medicine, we see a correspondence with the digestive tract. So when we think of yellow, we think of fire, we think of transformation and brilliance, the sun, anything that's warm and radiant. And to the other extreme could be hot, glowing, and here's where we can also see the fire element. And so just like inflammation can serve a purpose under acute situations, we don't want to have that fire dragged on chronically. So when we look at the gut, there are so many different things to be looking at here. I typically think of the trio of liver, stomach, pancreas, just straight across. But then also the small intestine. Small intestine is responsible for a lot of the digestion and assimilation of food. And many times we see a lot of inflammation. We see pain after people eat certain things that they can't tolerate. And so there are a number of strategies to help with really helping to get the gut to be more vital. And, eating is different for everybody, of course, but I think that there are some overarching principles that can help people. And that is, just simple ones like making sure that we choose more whole foods, unprocessed foods, that is, for people that aren't familiar with that term, more colorful foods, more plant-based foods. They tend to be more cooling, and they can cool down that very aggressive fire that we might experience in the gut. In fact, I just saw an article today that came out showing that women that consume more whole foods have less menopausal symptoms like hot flashes. So, that's always an issue for women, thinking of all of the inflammation that their body is more prone to when they go through the perimenopausal time. And now, knowing that whole foods, plant-based foods, can be instrumental for that is key. One other thing within plant foods that I think is worthwhile to mention is looking at bitter foods. Bitter foods are very intriguing to me because a lot of these bitter components can tap into certain receptors in our small intestine and change things like metabolism and digestion and motility. And, you wouldn't think that we're tasting down in our small intestine, but indeed we are.
Just give me an example of what a bitter food is.
Yeah. So one of the best examples of a bitter food is arugula. Arugula, kale, chervil, or even green tea. Green tea is considered to be bitter. And it has a lot of these astringent catechins in it, like epigallocatechin gallate. That's just one out of many, many, many. Soy isoflavones are thought to be bitter and have bitter properties. Hops, like a hoppy beer. And even a lot of medicinals, like hops is used typically as a sedative in botanical medicine. So, there's some effects that we're seeing more widespread other than just the taste of food, or, these receptors are found throughout the body. So I just think it's fascinating.
Sure, absolutely. So continuing on that, the colors of the rainbow.
Yeah. Oh, and also let me just mention this, the psychology piece of yellow is all about transformation. What are we looking to transform? And I think that for many of us, we feel very overwhelmed, very inundated, very stressed, and we aren't able to digest our life, which gives us indigestion perhaps in our bodies. So, how can we better transform? That's really the message that's coming to the surface for the yellow part.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. So number 4 on this circuit is green. So green is all, it corresponds to the heart and to the lungs, as well as to the system of circulation and respiration, which coincide with those two organ systems. So here's where we look at, pain and inflammation from the standpoint of, even let's take the heart first, and then we'll go to the lungs. What we know about cardiovascular disease is that it has an underlying inflammatory etiology, meaning inflammation is really seen to be the root cause of why people get heart attacks or cardiovascular disease in various forms, whether it's hypertension, angina, arrhythmia, so much that's connected now to inflammation that we didn't really realize before. When I think of even just a change in the vasculature of, our blood vessels, a lot of inflammatory markers can change up how our vessels open and close. And for some of us, this can become significantly changed and impaired as we get older. So you mentioned heart rate variability. Good to, bring that in, because that's one of the markers of keeping vital, and keeping the heart vital is to keep on the pulse of our heart rate variability, or the ability of the heart to respond to various changes in our environment. The heart is a very neurological organ. Many people don't realize that, but it's very connected to our nervous system functions. And so, we are constantly engaging the heart in stress. The other piece of the lungs, if I think of breathing in, breathing is free, and it's not just free, we've got to do it. So with every breath, making sure that we're taking full breaths, releasing a lot of the residual particles in our lungs, and getting a lot of those inflammatory compounds out, because and this was new to me, but based on some more recent research, what we know is that indoor air is 2 times more toxic than outdoor air. And so that's just fascinating. Just think of how many of us are in closed rooms or offices, or, we're kind of locked away indoors for much of the day. So breathing and circulating blood will be very important for things like helping with inflammatory processes. The psychological piece of green is all about expansion. What are we opening up to? And for many of us, this is connected to the element of love. When we think of the heart, many times we don't think of the heart as a pump. We think of this intangible concept of love. And so love keeps us vital. If you look at some of the research on people who live very long, what we see is that there is this sense of passion in their lives, that they love something. There's something that keeps them going and jumping out of bed in the morning. In fact, I just happened to see that there was a study published 2 days ago. They call them super centenarians, people that live to 110 or greater. And they found that the country that has the highest proportion of these super centenarians is Japan. Huh. Which perhaps is really no surprise. We learned about that in the blue zones, but when you compare all of those different zones, essentially Japan comes out way and above. So very interesting there. So that was green. Let me go to the purple. So aside from indigo, let's just think of like a lavender or a white. And when I think of lavender or this white color, I think of purification and clarification. Purification in the way of the body, clarification in the way of the mind. And here's where I put the concepts together of detoxification and also our sense of being connected, or the sense of spirituality that we might have. So with detoxification, how do we come clean in a very toxic world? It's a challenge, isn't it, to, stay vital, stay uninflamed within an environment that is only putting things in our way to keep us inflamed and feeling that pain. So again, I think that we can do that through food, but we can do it in many other ways. We interface with so many other things in our lives that we can perhaps detoxify. One of the things that I talked about in the Detox Summit was detoxifying our relationships. What are the toxic social networks that we're connected to? What about the toxic personal care products? What about toxic work environments? What about toxic homes? So I think we have to go beyond food into everything that's in our environment, because this is truly epigenetics. Epigenetics is not just food. It's everything in the environment and how that interacts with our genes. And then on the spiritual side, where do we need clarification, a sense of purpose? And I've noticed too, one of the vitality parameters for people is having a sense of purpose. They know exactly what their life is about. And, I've often thought that if there was a dietary supplement to help people with their sense of purpose, that would be all that they would need. It's powerful. It's powerful to know your purpose, right? And when you do know it, it's almost like it's a separate life force that really infects you in a really good way and gives you that sense of strength and confidence in what you do.
Absolutely. If you happen to get that pill, let me know. I've got the back.
Definitely.
Okay, so we've got, other than a cramped hand from writing down, this is really great stuff. Amazing. Where do we want to go from here?
Well, I think the only other thing I'd like to mention too is that, and I didn't really speak to this in any greater mention, but, we've got the colors. That's kind of the path to vitality through these different facets. When we talk inflammation, I would just encourage the listeners to be thinking of what does it mean in your life to be inflamed? What are you inflamed about? I would ask you that really tough question. What's really interesting is that there was a study that I remember from some years ago that showed that people that were more pessimistic had greater inflammatory cytokines in their body compared with people that were more optimistic. So it's just very interesting to me, if we take this word inflammation and turn it into something not just physiological, but now let's come over to the other P, psychological. What are we inflamed about? Why do we call conditions like irritable bowel syndrome? What are we irritated about? Inflammatory bowel disease. What are we inflamed about? So I think we have to look broader. I think we have to look at emotions. I think we have to look at, this is just an interesting tidbit, and I happened to come across this research not too long ago, but there was a study that showed that people with rheumatoid arthritis that cried during a sad movie versus those that did not cry, that had rheumatoid arthritis, actually fared better in their symptoms, which means that there might be a point to crying, to emotional release. And when they have studied the lacrimal fluid, which comes essentially your tears, right? When they study tears, what they find is that inside those tears is inflammatory cytokines. There are 25 plus different types of inflammatory cytokines that have been identified in tears. So that's pretty amazing to think that one of the ways that we can cool off and relieve inflammation is by crying. And again, it's one of those things that's free. I think many times we get so caught into thinking we have to pay big bucks for things and have to buy all these supplements and turmeric and, all these different things. We can just have a very robust spice cabinet at home with a bunch of turmeric and ginger and cloves and all kinds of spices that are anti-inflammatory. Then we can cry and express our emotions when we feel them. We can breathe deeply, and we can go walk outside. Right there, those are like 4 power pack strategies to really reducing pain at the body level and also the emotional level.
Absolutely. And you can see how you lay this out. These things actually go hand in hand. You're not going to have the physical without the psychological. You're not going to have the physical without the emotional or the spiritual. They all go hand in hand.
You got it. I'm right there on the same page with you. And I think for many people, this is a new concept. It feels kind of jarring. And many times people want to point to things outside themselves that are doing it. And I think we have to look outside of ourselves. What is in our environment that could be creating these changes within us? You know, just here would be my tip for the listeners. You know, take a piece of paper, fold it in two, or make a line right down the middle. And on the left side, I want you to write down all the things in your life that you get joy from. Just all the things that make you happy, give you passion, give you a sense of purpose. What are those things? Just identify them. Most people don't even know what they are. Then on the other side, I want you to make a list of all the things that inflame you, frustrate you, anger you, and deplete you of your resources inside. And I want you to do an inventory. Do you have more of one than the other? And if so, how can you adjust? This very simple exercise will give you a lot of insight into what you need to do. And most of us know what we have to do. We just don't know how to get there. And we haven't been convinced that it's something we need to do. But you and I, Mike, are definitely talking about the whole psycho-spiritual and the physical interconnection. So this is just one easy step to launch into that realm if this is intriguing. And it's one of those things where you've tried everything. What else do you do? You know, so just try that simple exercise and see what you come up with. Work with a practitioner or a good friend and kind of go through that list and see where you can start to make some small changes. And many times it's just a small tweak that can have this ripple through effect. Truly amazing.
Truly amazing. And I would tell people they should really look at doing this exercise daily, because the act of actually writing it down on paper, you're going to actually start to see what brings you more joy. What are you grateful for? And when we're living more in that side, in the state of gratitude, in the state of things that are joyful for us, the other stuff kind of just flows away.
Yeah.
Which is really remarkable.
Yep. Follow your excitement and your passion. Follow your joy.
So, Deanna, where can people find you? Because this has been absolutely fascinating for me, and I'm sure people want to know more about what you do. You're an author. You've written 4 books. You're a yoga instructor. You're a speaker. Where can people find all of your information?
Yeah, they can make a beeline to my website. That's probably the easiest way. And the website is www.foodandspirit.com, foodandspirit.com. And what you'll see on there is that I do give a lot of talks to different people. And one of the areas that I'm very focused in is training health professionals to work with this system of 7 to help their patients in the physiological and psychological issues of disease. And I have a framework that they can use, because many times people do one or the other and they can't figure out how to mesh them together. So I've actually done that and present that to various practitioners. So I've got a certification program. If you're interested just in short kind of tips and strategies, you can visit my Facebook page, which is Food and Spirit with Dr. Deanna Minich. And that's where I play. I like to put tips, articles, posts that are inspirational as well as informative. So you can find me in those 2 places.
Awesome. And that's Food, Food, and A-N-D, Spirit, SPIRIT.com.
You got it. Yeah.
Awesome. Deanna, thanks so much for being on the Pain Relief Project today. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to our audience. It has been really enjoyable for me, and I'm sure everybody else out there feels the same way.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for doing this. I know that pain is a big deal, and so many people suffer from various levels of pain. So you're doing them a great service by getting this information out. So congratulations to you.